But the purpose of Revelation is to give us an encouragement so that we might be able to face whatever comes our way in terms of persecution and hardship and trial. And the historical evidence suggests that it actually has accomplished its purpose pretty well. Maybe not every Christian has successfully held their faith through every trial and held fast in every way, but we have, historically speaking, some extremely interesting examples of Christians bearing up under persecution, particularly in the Roman Empire. For instance, there's an actual historical account that you can go find called the Acts of the Littleton Martyrs. It's an account of a trial that occurred for six Christians in the year 180 AD. In fact, we know the exact date, July 17th, 180 AD. In the city of Carthage, this happened. Now, that's not Asia Minor, obviously, but we can see the similarities of what's going on in Carthage as opposed to what we've been looking at in terms of what's happening in Asia Minor. These men, these 6 Littleton martyrs, they're called, had been charged for being Christians. And so they stood up before Saturninus, the proconsul in charge of the area, and Saturninus says to them, "We can dispense with any formal inquiries into your behavior if you will just simply now, before me, swear to emperor as Lord." This is a law that had been instituted 80 years previously by Trajan when he was emperor of Rome. And it was still the law of the day. And so it was done specifically to outlaw the Christian confession that Jesus is Lord. They wanted to make sure that Christians couldn't say that anymore. So Saturninus says, "Swear that the emperor is Lord and you can go free." But the spokesman for these men says, "We have committed no wrong. We have committed no theft. When we buy something, we pay the taxes on it. We do all this because we know our Lord, who no one sees with these eyes, who is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords." Saturninus says, "Do you want to rethink that?" He gives them another chance. And these men are like, "No, we're Christians. We're never going to come off of that statement." And so Saturninus says, "Since you have obstinately persisted," it says in the translation, "it is determined that you will be put to the sword." And listen how they responded. "Thanks be to God." Saturninus tells them they're going to be put to the sword, and they say, "Thanks be to God." Wow. I mean, they're being called onto the carpet, and they knew that ultimately this was going to lead to their death, and it's going to be untimely. Is there any other kind? I don't know. And they quote Revelation 19. That's what they're quoting when they say, "We have the King of Kings and Lord of Lords." And in Revelation 19, verse 16, it says, "On his robe and on his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords." Which means that Jesus, through John, gave Christians, even Christians thousands of miles away, truths that helped them to endure under trial, to hold on to their faith. He gave them words to lift up their eyes, and it worked. See, these Christians endured, just as Jesus commends the Christians in Philadelphia in verse 10 of our passage today. "Because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world." Because you've heard and you've trusted and endured. That's 3 phases of their path of discipleship. Because they've done all of these things, they will be kept from the hour of trial that's coming on the whole world. And what we see ultimately in this letter to the Philadelphians is that Jesus alone holds the key. That's our first point. Let's go back to verse 7 before we get into verse 10. Verse 7 says, "And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens." So we see there in the introduction, this is a letter to the church of Philadelphia, not the one in Pennsylvania. It didn't exist in 90 AD. You may not be aware of that, but our country is rather young in comparison to the world history. And so this is the Philadelphia that is about 28 miles southeast of Sardis, who we looked at last week on the major trade route through the region. But what's important today is not so much about what Philadelphia was, but about the people who held on to Jesus in Philadelphia. And we've been looking at in all of these letters how Jesus introduces himself, and that gives us a clue as to what he's going to tell this church in every single case. And this is how he describes himself here: the Holy One, the True One. Now, I think that we can understand those basic concepts without going into too much detail on that. We've talked about holiness and we've talked about truth in the past. But here he says, who has the key of David. Now, we could probably guess, we could take wild stabs at that and say that has something to do with the monarchy of ancient Israel and that he is in the lineage of David, and so therefore he's the new once and future king, all that kind of stuff. We could say all those things. But there's a little bit more that I want to go into with that, because obviously he's talking about a key, and we immediately go to locks and stuff like that. There's no master locks back then. You may not be aware of that. But that's kind of what we look at, is in terms of how a key works. Fit it into a door, turn the key, it's locked, or turn the key and it's unlocked. But that's not actually what's happening here. In fact, what Jesus is quoting here is Isaiah 22:22. And I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. He shall open, and none shall shut, and he shall shut, and none shall open. Now, I'll give you the historical background of this. This is a pronouncement to Shebna. And you go, I've never heard of Shebna. Nor should you have. Because Shebna was all about his own glory. The pronouncement that is coming to Shebna is God saying, look, you have tried to get for yourself more glory than you are due. Now, presumably what happened was Shebna was trying to build for himself a tomb fit for a king. But it was for Shebna, not a king. That cracker would not go away. Anyway, so this tomb that Shebna had built for himself, for his own glory, so that people might wonder about this man Shebna and what he did in life down through the centuries and think, my goodness, he must have been a great man. But God comes to Shebna and says, because you've honored yourself and not me, I'm going to grab you by the hair, I'm going to swing you around and toss you like a ball into a wide open land. It says that right there in Isaiah 22. I mean, so you can't make this. God has a sense of humor. I think sometimes he puts stuff into scripture just so that he can entertain Forney. I don't know. I mean, it might be it. But he says, I'm going to grab you by the hair, I'm going to spin you around, I'm going to throw you out into a wide land. That's an incredible quote. But anyway, the whole statement here is that he is supplanting Shebna as basically what we would consider to be like the chief of staff, and he's going to replace him with a guy named Eliakim. Now, Eliakim is going to get what we see on the screen there. All of what is said there is about Eliakim, not Shebna. God says that Eliakim will become ultimately the de facto leader of the house of David. Now, this is hundreds of years after David, so when we say the house of David, we're talking about the royal house, not David's house itself. But what does that mean to place on him the key to the house of David? Well, back in those days, they didn't have locks, as we've just said. There's no master locks. There's nothing like that going on. They had doors, of course, but there were no locking mechanisms on those doors. No padlocks of any kind. So if you wanted to secure something, wanted to keep the silver safe, for instance, you didn't have a lock to put on it, so you would place a guard over it to secure it. So you placed a guard instead of a physical key. Because of that guard being there, instead of having a physical key, because obviously that would make no sense. Here, I'm going to come up in a minute, right? What you would put is you would put a symbol on the shoulder of the person who had access to whatever the guard was guarding. And so that would be recognized by all those whose job it was to guard the silver or keep the people in the house or protect the stable. If you wore that symbol and you approached that guard, they would let you pass. They would let you have access. And whoever had the key to the whole household was completely in charge and managed everything and ran everything. And so they had access to everything. They had that symbol on them that said, yes, I have the right to be here. Everywhere that has anything to do with this household, I have the right to be. And so when you saw that symbol, you would allow them access. You didn't block them from anything. And if they told you to lock a door and don't let anybody that doesn't have the symbol on their shoulder in, you would block that door upon pain of death. so that nobody could get in. That's what you did. So Isaiah goes on to use this imagery for Eliakim, and he says, ultimately, that Eliakim is going to do his job so well, unlike Shebna, Eliakim is going to do his job so well that he will honor his whole household. In fact, this is what it says. And I will fasten him like a peg in a secure place, and they will hang on him the whole honor of his father's house, every small vessel from the cups to all the flagons. Now, this is like a word picture that needs a little bit of unpacking for us to be able to really access it, because this is not something that we do in our modern culture. You and I, we have mudrooms, maybe. And in those mudrooms, we have lots of hooks that we would hang our coats on. Well, back in the ancient days, instead of cupboards to put all of their mugs on, they had hooks, they had pegs, and they would hang all of the water jugs and all of the pitchers and all of the cups on those pegs in their kitchen so that they could have access to them. And so this is what is being told about Eliakim. Eliakim is going to be the peg, like the ultimate peg, that all of his lineage, all of his household, everybody would hang from. Every other name, ultimately, will depend on him. Now that's a lot of weight to bear for one man. And if you read on in the story in Isaiah, what you find out is that it is in fact too much weight to bear for Eliakim. And what we see in Isaiah is that eventually that peg breaks to the detriment and the honor of the whole kingdom as they're carted off to Babylon. But let me ask you this. What if that one peg wasn't just a man? What if he was also fully God? See, this is ultimately what Jesus is doing by calling that forward, that statement forward into Revelation. Jesus is claiming this statement made in Isaiah for himself here in verse 7. The words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. You see, I am the one who has the key of David. I am the one that opens all doors or shuts doors permanently so that they cannot ever be opened. And in that sense, I am the name above every other name. In fact, I am the name, I am the peg on which every other cup and every flagon will hang. Every life, in other words, will depend on me. That's ultimately what he's calling forward. I mean, honestly, this is literature when you see stuff like this. Like, this isn't just like, oh, the Bible is just some random guy writing stuff down. This is actual literature. This is a callback of 500 years. And if you think that a poor fisherman from Galilee came up with this stuff on his own, man, you are really gullible. Because there's no way John came up with that on his own. To take a story in Isaiah about Eliakim, the keeper of the household of David, and apply that to Jesus in 90 AD is incredible literature. It's just, if you're not amazed by this, I don't know what to tell you. Obviously, this is a revelation, even to John. So Jesus alone holds that key, and then he says, I have the keys of David, and what he means by that is, I have absolute power. I have absolute authority in all of the things that I speak to. I do, not me, Jesus. You're not in charge. You're not in charge of your life. Your life hangs on me. See? And this is the heart of all of this, really. He has the keys. That means he's been given the power. He has the rightful authority over you. And of course he does, because he's your maker. This is what we see in John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And if you read the rest of chapter 1, you see John telling us that the word that phrase that he's using there is Jesus Christ. You see, an artist, and we know this, an artist has the rights over their painting. An inventor has the rights over their invention. An author has the rights over every written word that they write. You can't even borrow something that somebody else wrote without ascribing to them credits for doing so. And even then you might get into trouble if you borrow too much of it. It's called plagiarism. See, Jesus is your author, and that's why he has the rightful authority to your life and over your life.